So now we come to the mixed action, which I think is the most interesting of the actions that Aristotle describes. And although he only spends a couple sentences on it in the Nicomachean Ethics, which is where your selection comes from, I think it is actually probably, again, one of the most sort of philosophically and morally interesting of the kinds of actions. And again, this is the mixed action. The mixed action is an action that mixes elements of voluntariness and non-voluntariness. And I often think of it as kind of like a tragic action. And you'll see why in a minute. So an example of a mixed action, I'll give you the example before I give you the definition, is say you're a ship's captain, and this is the example Aristotle uses, and it's a terrible storm, and you need to throw all your cargo overboard to keep the ship from sinking. Well, this Aristotle says is mixed because you wouldn't voluntarily choose to throw your cargo overboard for like no reason, like just because it would be fun. But you really have no other choice but to do that, because if you don't, your ship will sink. So a mixed action is an action that is chosen, but you really have no choice in choosing it. Like, except for maybe in a, sort of a stupid way that, well, I guess you could choose to have your ship sink and everybody on it die. But assuming that you're not sort of a psycho like that, you have no choice but to throw your cargo overboard, right? Reasonable people have no choice but to throw the cargo overboard and save the lives of everyone on the ship, right? So the mixed action is an action where you are in this kind of extreme situation where you're being forced to do something that you would not normally choose to do in order to avert a greater evil or a greater tragedy, right? So I throw all of my cargo overboard to keep, to save the lives of everybody on the ship, right? That is a mixed action. Or Aristotle says a king or a tyrant might say, hey, if you don't go and do this mission for me, I'm going to kill your whole family. Well, I mean, normally you might not want to go on a mission for a tyrant, but you don't want your whole family to be killed either, so you'll go on the mission. And when it comes to mixed actions, Aristotle thinks that mixed actions are not things that we praise people for or blame them for, right? If a captain throws their cargo overboard to save the ship, or to keep the ship from sinking, no reasonable person is going to say, man, why'd you throw the cargo overboard? You should have just had everybody die and the ship drown, right? No one's going to say that. Instead, Aristotle says, when people perform mixed actions, the typical feeling we have is pity. We feel bad for them that they were in a situation where they had to make that choice, right? We feel bad for the captain that he was in a storm that was so bad that if he didn't throw all his cargo overboard, everybody would have died. That's a terrible situation to be in. So we pity the captain for being in that scenario. Or if someone says, I had to go and rob this bank because if I didn't, the tyrant said that he was going to murder my whole family. A reasonable person, Aristotle says, does not blame you for robbing the bank as much as we pity you for being in the situation where you had to rob that bank. Now, the interesting thing about mixed actions is that I said that these are kind of like the tragic actions, right? In another book by Aristotle called The Poetics, where he discusses comedy and tragedy and poetry and theater and things like that, he says that the emotion that is typically produced by tragic theater, right? So you could think of the ancient Greek tragedies is directly what Aristotle was talking about, but really sort of any sort of tragic story is to produce feelings of pity and fear. You pity the characters for what they had to go through, and you fear what might happen if you had to go through that, right? So if the captain is telling you the story of their ship nearly sinking and the only way they were able to save it was by, throwing cargo overboard and, yada, 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 you would pity the captain for having to do that. And if you were the kind of person that sailed regularly, if you were often in the shipping business, then you might also fear that someday something like that could happen to you. Now, for Aristotle, the point of this is to say that when we talk about virtue and vice, we are talking only about voluntary actions, right? And again, those are the actions where you choose what to do in full knowledge of what you are doing. And he says we're not talking about virtue and vice when we are talking about involuntary actions, non-voluntary actions, or mixed actions. And so for the rest of the Nicomachean Ethics, all of Aristotle's attention is on voluntary actions. But I think that much of the kind of things that we discuss in ethics, and much of the kind of things that we deal with in our own sort of day-to-day lives when we're wrestling with big moral decisions, are probably more accurately described as mixed actions. And so that more often than not, when someone does something that maybe I don't agree with or that I don't like, if I consider it impartially or not in the heat of the moment, I find that they at least thought that they had no other choice, and that it was more properly categorized as a mixed action, that I might pity them and fear that someday I'll be in the same situation, rather than blame them by assigning vice to their action and saying that's a vicious thing to do and you're a terrible person. Like, if we were to dig more into Aristotle, you'd see that it's actually really rare for someone to be vicious. Like, a vicious person in Aristotle is as rare as an excellent person. Most of us are not morally excellent, we're not virtuous, and we're not vicious either. We're just kind of in this lukewarm area in between. But that's ethics, that's another class. But I want to give you that rundown of Aristotle and the different kinds of actions. And keep in mind that whenever he's talking about virtue, or whenever other ethicists and philosophers are talking about virtue, they're limiting themselves only to voluntary actions, which are arguably only a small proportion of our daily actions in life. And then and I know